When it comes to doing vintage style watches, one micro brand is in a league of their own, and that micro brand is Vario. When I look at their watches, it almost feels like they're coming out of like an alternate universe. Like they're watches that could have existed in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, but never actually did. And today we're going to be checking out their newest release, which also happens to be my personal favorite one that they've done yet. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Vario 1918 Pilot's Watch. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave, I live in Japan, and I love to collect affordable watches. But one thing that I haven't gotten into is vintage watches. And I know there are a lot of affordable vintage watches out there, but I'm still just not quite knowledgeable enough about that. I feel like if I'm going to go out and buy something, I might get like a fake watch, or I might get one that's going to need a lot of servicing and repair. And all of that risk is something that I'm just not yet comfortable at. And maybe that's why I like Vario so much. More so than any other micro brand out there, they give you watches that feel like they're right out of the past, and yet they're made with modern materials. You get things like sapphire crystals, Japanese automatic movements, and high quality manufacturing. And with every vintage style watch they do, they just really nail all of the details in putting together a watch that is so unique and that just feels so true to the time period that it's coming from. And to me, what's almost even more interesting is a lot of times these are watches that weren't even necessarily made back in that time period, but they look like they could have been. Like this watch we're looking at today. This is a tilted dial pilot's watch that's in a 40mm case that's designed to look like a modified World War I trench watch. And comment down below if you are aware of watches like this, but I've never seen anything like this before. And yet it looks amazing and it kind of makes sense. The tilted dial on the watch does make it easier to read at a glance. So if you have your hands out like this, like you're flying a plane, you just have to go like this to see the time rather than going all the way over here. And everything about this watch, from the case shape that looks like a modified pocket watch, to the beautiful enamel dial and vintage style typeface and handset, to the hand wound mechanical movement inside. So this is not an automatic movement, this is a hand wound movement. All of this feels like a watch from that time period. And to make things even better, this is one of the few watches that my wife really liked. So let's jump in and start taking a look at all of those really cool little historical details, talk a bit about how this thing actually wears with that tilted dial and the bun strap that it comes included on. And of course, I'll talk about the drawbacks and some of the things that could have been improved on this watch. But before we do, I do need to mention this watch was given to me by Vario to facilitate this review, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any compensation, nor did Vario have any control over the content of this review. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the Vario 1918 Pilot's Watch. Okay, so as you can see, this is an incredibly unique watch, and it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where we should start with this. This is a 40mm diameter watch, but it doesn't really wear like any other 40mm that I've tried. Visually, it kind of looks smaller than 40mm on my wrist, but at the same time, because of that bun strap, it feels like it has a larger wrist presence than most 40mm watches would have. The crown is positioned at what would normally be 2 o'clock on a normal watch dial, but here that's the 12 o'clock. And that's because the entire watch face is tilted, which was kind of a genre of watches from the early 1900s. The idea being that it would allow you to discreetly check the time without needing you to raise your wrist and bring it around in front of your face, something that was often touted as being beneficial to drivers who had to have their hand tied to the steering wheel of a car, but was also very popular for businessmen and, ironically, preachers who wanted to be able to check the time without looking like they were in a hurry or bored. And that could kind of make sense for a pilot's watch too, I suppose. As far as wearing and using the watch, it does take some getting used to. I think most people sort of have the motion of reading the time on a watch ingrained into their mind, and you have to change that here. But when driving around town, I did notice that the orientation of the watch was perfectly lined up when I had my hand on the steering wheel, which did make it easier to read the time. And if you can get used to it, I think this is actually a faster and kind of easier orientation to see the time on. And it is more discreet as well. You can kind of glance at the watch on your wrist without really moving your wrist around that much. But I found myself actually wanting to pull the watch in front of me and really stare at it because the dial has such a unique and beautiful finish to it. This is an enamel dial, which I absolutely love. It just has a beautiful glossiness and reflectiveness to it. There are some positions where you can actually see yourself as a reflection in the dial itself. And while I often find reflections and glare in watch crystals to be annoying, seeing this come off the dial of the watch is a completely different effect. And this is the first time I've seen a navy blue enamel dial. For the most part, you see white or black being far more common, but this is just a really beautiful and subtle shade of blue that has a great contrast with the white numerals and the white hands. And those hands and numerals are both absolutely gorgeous. The typeface on the numerals is right out of the early 1900s, and it's a very unique and bold effect. I can't tell if they're giving me Gothic vibes or Old West vibes, but either way, it's really cool. And these numerals are huge on the dial. This definitely helps with legibility, and it also kind of balances the dial really well because other than the numerals and the small Vario logo, there's no other printing on this dial. And yet, because the numerals and the handset have such presence, it doesn't feel sparse at all. Surrounding the dial is a railroad-style chapter ring, allowing you to read the minutes or seconds very easily. And the handset matches everything perfectly. You have a beautiful cathedral-style hour hand and a large minute hand with a syringe tip that stretches all the way out to that chapter ring on the dial. Both of the hands have what looks to be a brushed finish to them, and they're very sharply cut with no rough edges. Wonderful job there. Finally, the second hand adds a splash of color with a red accent, which again goes really great with that navy dial, the white text, and then just that little splash of red really livens things up. Both the hands and the dial markings are all lumed as well with Swiss Superluminova C3, so you get a cool green glow in the dark. However, the performance of the Lume was one of the few disappointments I had with this watch. The handset is adequate. It's bright enough to last you for a little while. It's not great, but again, it's good enough. Unfortunately, the numerals on the dial are much weaker and they fade fairly quickly, so it's not going to be long before you're left with just the handset being visible. I would have liked to have at least seen the markers be as bright as the handset and last as long as the handset. And it would have been even better if everything could have been pumped up a little bit. But given that Vario has this priced pretty aggressively at $388, I think that that's one of the trade-offs that they had to make, given all of the other unique features of this watch and all of the extra manufacturing costs that are going to go into making something to look like this. So even though I love great Lume, for me on this particular watch, it's not a deal breaker. Let's take a look at the case shape now, because this is another very unique thing about this watch. This is kind of an evolution of Vario's trench watch. It features the same case style as that one, which was modeled after some of the very first men's wristwatches that were ever made that came out of World War I. By and large, these started out as modified pocket watches. So you had a pocket watch that had some wire lugs welded onto it to allow you to feed a strap through it and attach it to your wrist to make it easier to tell the time without needing to pull the thing out of your pocket. So this watch has a pocket watch style case, which is very round and kind of bowl shaped, but it's far smaller than most pocket watches ever were, coming in at only 40 millimeters. And while it does feature fixed wire lugs, these are attached very professionally without any obvious welding marks. And when you combine that with that round onion style crown lined up at the 12 o'clock marker on the dial, it really does look like a little pocket watch. And both the crown and the case are finished very nicely as well. The case features circular brushing that goes all the way around the case, and the detailed crown is both easy to grip and signed with the Vario logo. Now we need to talk a little bit about those wire lugs, because that is another very unique feature of this watch and something that you need to be aware of. Those are fixed lugs, so this watch is not going to be compatible with straps that are meant to work with spring bars. This watch is only going to be compatible with single pass straps or double pass military style, NATO style straps, or straps that have been custom designed to work with fixed lugs like this. And that's the kind of strap that Vario has included here. This is a two-piece strap with a bund pad behind it, which I think just looks awesome on this watch. But it's also very interesting how it functions. That little pad on the back of the watch can be removed if you like. But what's interesting about this strap is that those rivets near the lugs are actually functional. They're not decorative. On the underside of the strap, there are little screws that secure a flap of leather that wraps around those fixed lugs. And when you unscrew it, it allows you to remove the strap from the watch. So this is going to be one of the only two-piece straps you'll be able to put on this watch. But again, it's a great one. It's made out of crazy seahorse leather, which has a nice texture to it. And the leather of the entire bun strap is very high quality. So I'm very happy using this strap with the watch. And it's worth noting that Vario offers this bun strap in a bunch of different color options, so you've got some choices there as well. Finally, we need to talk about the movement in this watch because this is a fairly rare movement. This is a mechanical movement. So this is a hand wound only movement. It doesn't have automatic winding, which means that you are going to have to wind the watch every day or every other day. It's got a 42-hour power reserve. And I think this is pretty cool on a vintage style watch like this because back in 1918, automatic movements were not very common at all. And it's fairly rare to see micro brands using mechanical movements like this. This movement is the Miyota 8N33 mechanical movement, which according to one website I checked when doing some research on this has actually been discontinued. So there's probably not that many of these out there, but it is a Japanese movement from Miyota, which manufactures very reliable movements. In addition to the 42-hour power reserve, you're getting a standard 21,600 beats per hour beat rate and a stated accuracy of between -20 and +40 seconds a day, which again is pretty comparable to most Japanese automatic movements in the entry level. One thing to note that while this watch does obviously feature hand winding, that's the only way to wind this watch. It does not feature hacking. And when I first noticed that, I kind of had some strong negative reactions to it. Pilots' watches and military watches in particular really value hacking because it allows you to precisely set the time to a reference time, which is very important for combat and those sorts of things. But actually hacking was something that didn't become that common in watch movements until World War II. So a World War I era pilot's watch probably wouldn't have had hacking, and I guess that kind of works here. I still would have preferred a movement with hacking, but again, your choices are pretty limited here in this price range, and to get a good, reliable Japanese movement, and hey, if it's technically period correct, I can't really fault them for that. Because that's what I really love about this watch. Every single little detail on this feels like it came right out of that World War I era. It's just such a fun watch to wear because it has so many interesting little details and so many things that make it unique and different from pretty much any other watch out there. And yet at the same time, it's legible and functional, and I think style-wise still looks great even in 2024. All right, and that's going to wrap it up for this review. Like I said before, this is probably my personal favorite watch from Vario to date. This is one that I'm definitely going to be keeping and holding on to for a while and wearing. It really hits the sweet spot for me in terms of wearability and size and having a really cool vintage aesthetic without being too quirky or too unusual. Some of Vario's watches have such a historical feel that I almost feel like I'm cosplaying when I wear them, which is not my thing. And this one I think I can pull off, and I think it'll fill a great spot in my collection for something that's a little bit quirky, but very cool and retro and vintage at the same time. Anyways, drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this watch and Vario in general. You can pick it up direct from Vario's website. If you're interested, leave a link to that down below. And if you want to get your hands on a hoodie or t-shirt like this one, I'm selling them on my website at justthewatch.com. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.